Teachers, I apologize that I am definitely, I don't know if you even can see me, but I'm definitely not in a suit or anything like that. I'm down here at the state track meet to watch my kids perform for state. And anyway, exciting stuff. But this coming week, we have some great things that we get to teach with the second coming. I know that many of you are trying to finish your items regarding the test and the doctrinal mastery assessment and all of that, which is important, and also get that recorded. Remember that we have some deadlines. We've got to have those things turned in so we can close out terms for the different areas that are graduating high school, and also so we can close out the software so that we can print diplomas and those kind of things for our seniors. And so if you have any questions or you're struggling with that, please refer back to the emails that I asked Sister Roth to send to you, or reach out to me or to her and we can help. And so do your best. I know it's coming to a close and kids are tired and kids are late and lots of kids are gone with sporting events and all of that. So I totally understand. But as we teach this week, we've got some great things, and I wanted to kind of remind you of something, that when we teach the scriptures, the scriptures deal with all the things in the past, and we're living in the present. And there's this bridge that bridges the gap where the scriptures have meaning for us today. And what bridges that gap is the principles. The principles in the scriptures. Well, this week we're going to teach about the second coming things, but I think as we teach, we got to make sure we don't miss a principle that bridges the gap from the past. Because what we're going to study in Matthew chapter 24 in the Joseph Smith Matthew are two questions that the apostles had. They had two specific questions, right? And so in verse 4, you can even invite your students to look for and find those two questions. And one of those questions was, first, they had the question of, tell us concerning the temple, the destruction of the temple and of the Jews. That was the first question, right? The second question was, well, tell us the sign of the second coming. Not all of Joseph Smith Matthew is about the second coming. It's actually about the destruction of Jerusalem as well. But it's the past of Christ's time and the apostles' time, and the present of our time is linked beautifully with the principle that if we're following the prophets and if we're following the teachings of the gospel, we'll be prepared no matter what destruction's coming. Destruction of Jerusalem or the end of the world, the second coming. And so, like in your scriptures, please note that in the Pearl of Great Price, verse 5 through 20 in Joseph Smith Matthew 24, 5 through 20 is all about the destruction of the temple and the Jews. And then verse 21 through 55 is about the second coming. And sometimes I like to invite my students to write that in their scriptures, to make that note so that they understand. Because there's this beautiful symbolism and teaching for us as the disciples literally ask, like I'm in my scriptures here, as they're like, tell us concerning the destruction of the temple and the Jews. And then Jesus starts right in. He says, take heed, lest no one deceive you. He's like, many will come and say that they're Christ, and there'll be afflictions. And in verse 7, people will kill you, the apostles. And in verse 8, there's going to be many offended. In verse 9, there'll be false prophets. In verse 10, there's going to be iniquity, and the love of men will wax cold. Now, this is all about the destruction of Jerusalem. And he's like, but he that remaineth steadfast, the key verse in verse 11, I think is a principle that bridges the gap from the past to the present. That he that remaineth steadfast and is not overcome, the same shall be saved. Well, same for us today. The second coming, there's some scary things. There's going to be destruction. The love of men will wax cold. There'll be wars and rumors of wars, false Christ, and all of that. But if we're steadfast in the gospel, we'll be saved. And look at the beautiful symbolism as Christ is outlining for them what's going to happen, right? In the destruction of Jerusalem. Now, we know that in 70 AD, we know from the Roman historian Josephus, that in 70 AD, the destruction of Jerusalem happens. The same destruction prophesied by the prophet Daniel. And that's what it's talking about in Matthew 24, or Joseph Smith Matthew chapter 1 and verse 12, where it says, where Jesus tells them, when it says, when you shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet Daniel. And that abomination of desolation was that it would be so bad that women would eat their babies, and there'd be starvation, and there'd be siege, and there'd be destruction in Jerusalem. That's what Daniel prophesied. So Jesus is saying, when you see this, when you see the army getting ready to lay siege, he's like, when you see that, he tells them in verse 12, ye shall stand in the holy place. He's like, whoso readeth, let him understand. Go to the holy place, flee to the mountains, which is just kind of interesting. He actually tells them that very thing. And so what's kind of fascinating is that in 70 AD, when the Romans come in, not only do they lay siege until the people are starving so bad that they're eating their dead. When people die, they eat their flesh to survive themselves, and that's starvation. I mean, it's bad. Cannibalism and everything, just horrible, according to Josephus. And obviously this is happening partially in prophecy fulfillment of, because of your crucifixion of the Lord, there'll be great destruction that'll come upon you. And so that starts to happen, but it's bad. I mean, 1 million Jews are killed, 100,000 are taken captive. They crucify like everybody they can find in the city, pretty much. They basically, they don't take slaves. They gather and use all the wood in the city to crucify all of the Jews. And blood flows through the streets. And then to make a statement, they're going to do some other horrible things. They're going to destroy the temple. They're going to plow. They're going to literally take the stones down one by one of the whole temple of Jerusalem. The Romans will. And the Romans want to make Jerusalem an example for the rest of the world. Don't cross us. So they'll literally wipe Jerusalem off the map and plow it as a field and leave just part of a wall standing so people would say, oh yeah, that was where Jerusalem was. Don't mess with Rome. Look what they did to it. But the question is, what about the faithful? Because Jesus said in verse 11, he's like, when you see this is going to happen, but he that is faithful will not be overcome. And when you see the signs of the desolation of Daniel, starvation and the laying siege, when you see that happening, you need to flee. In fact, look at verse 13, the key phrase. Then let them who are of Jerusalem or of Judea flee into the mountains, and let him who is on the housetop flee and not return or take anything. Just go when you see this starting to happen. Ironically, most of the Jews, when they saw Rome coming and when they saw them laying siege, they could have left at that time, but they were arrogant enough thinking, well, we're still going to fight. We're going to overcome. It's not going to be a big deal. You know, we're a stronghold. We're not going to leave our holy city kind of thing. And they're wiped out. But if you were righteous and you were following the prophets, you would have left. I love how Bruce McConkie says it, because in verse 13-14, right, he's like, the Lord told him how to prepare for this. Just leave when you see it's happening. And let me skip this. And I just love this. He told him to flee into the mountains. Well, in history, we actually have in history Christian people that were led to this area, that literally they fled and were led to Pella, to this area of mountains for safety, and they escaped the destruction and burning and horrible crucifixions that happened in Jerusalem. Like, if they followed the prophet, if they listened to what Jesus had warned them about, then they were saved. They were spared. And yes, there were some Christians that were killed. And yes, the apostles are going to be killed, just like Jesus tells them. And there's hard things, but there's many who are saved because they followed the words of the prophets. So the reason I'm saying all this is because it's this great bridge. There's this bridge the gap, right? Now the rest of Joseph Smith-Matthew is going to talk about the second coming. And wouldn't it be the same for us? Like, if we hear all these prophecies and knew all the signs of the second coming, then we'll gather and we'll flee and we'll go to where prophets direct, guided by revelation, and we could be spared some of the destructions that are going to come in the second coming. I know there'll be people that are righteous who will suffer and die in the second coming. That'll happen too. But those who follow the prophets and those who are listening, they'll know where to flee to, and many will be spared and saved. And if not spared and saved the physical destruction, they'll be spiritually prepared when it happens. The Lord prepares us for his coming. Really, the past is an example for us in the future. The righteous saints in Christ's first coming were fled to the mountains, and many were spared because they followed the prophets and were guided by revelation. Well, in our day with the second coming, if we follow the prophets and are guided by revelation, we'll be spared too. So use the principle in verse 11 to link the past and present. I hope this is helpful. I hope you have a wonderful week. I hope you have a chance to teach some of this amidst all the administrative things we're doing with doctoral mastery exams and all that. But God bless you and good luck.